Welcome to the Tough Mothers podcast, where we talk about motherhood, all of it, but especially the science of motherhood, so you can learn how to be the happiest mother you know. Hi, welcome to the Tough Mothers podcast, where we discuss everything you need to know about motherhood, no matter how taboo or unpleasant, so you can learn, thrive, and be the happiest mother you know. I'm your host, Dr. Jennifer Hacker-Pearson, but mainly I get called Mama. I'm also a PhD qualified neuroscientist, psychotherapist, and meditation teacher. And I'm on a mission to lift the lid on motherhood and teach you evidence-based scientific knowledge and tools you can incorporate into your life so you can be truly, truly happy. It's really important to me that every mother can access this knowledge and information, which is why my podcasts are free. To support me, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, Dr. Jen Tough Mothers, and please tell all your family and friends about the Tough Mothers podcast. So, today's episode is a little bit different. Like I said in the intro, we discuss everything you need to know about motherhood, no matter how taboo or unpleasant. Well, this episode definitely falls under the taboo umbrella, which is why we really need to talk about it. I'm talking about alcohol in motherhood, or rather, alcohol and motherhood. You may not know this about me, but I have been a non-drinker for over 3 years. There was no rock bottom for me, but like many mums, I was using alcohol to make motherhood easier. Hard truth, it doesn't. In fact, alcohol makes motherhood a lot harder. My guest today, Sarah Rusbatch, also found that the freedom she sought from alcohol, she actually found once she stopped drinking. Sarah is a mother, a certified health and wellness coach, and an accredited grey area drinking coach who supports women to change their relationship with alcohol. What's grey area drinking, you may ask? Well, we will talk about that today, as well as why alcohol is the biggest anxiety culprit, how you can find your true self by putting down the bottle, and why mummy wine culture is so damaging. Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for coming on the Tough Mothers podcast. As I mentioned to you, I'm really excited to have this conversation because I think it's something that we need to speak about more often. And if you don't mind, I'd like to start with how, when, and why you stopped drinking.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your podcast. I think it's an amazing resource and something I certainly wish that I had discovered in the early days of motherhood. So my story very much is very similar to that of many other women, in that there was no big rock bottom moment for me. I didn't define myself as being an alcoholic. I didn't have any big situation where I lost my home or my relationship or my driving license. But it was a slow, insidious creep up of all these ways in which I noticed that alcohol was really starting to take more than it was giving. But let me take you back a little bit. So I guess in my 20s, I started drinking in the UK, in Northern England, age 15, kind of what you did on a Friday night. You went down the bus stop with a bottle of cider and you drank a bottle of cider and you kissed inappropriate boys, and then you went home and had chewing gum. And that was kind of like my introduction to alcohol at such an early age.
Not too different to Australia.
Exactly. And then I went to uni where, of course, it's very much and I was growing up, I'm 45 now, so I was growing up in an era in the 90s where it was very much girl power. It was very much the girls can do the same as the boys. We matched the boys pint for pint down the pub. Student nights where it was 40p for a shot of vodka, which is like 80 cents. And so like you were having quadruple shots of vodka, and and that was just my teenage years and my uni life. And then I moved to London and I moved straight into a job in recruitment where like my fourth interview was going to the pub and doing shots of Sambuca to see how well I could handle my booze. Needless to say, I passed with flying colours, and then so began my life as a single young woman in London, just left uni. Sex and the City was, my role models, and we were out living our life like that. What had gone from being student days of pound a pint became, champagne and cocktails and rooftop bars and all the rest of it. But alcohol had still played a really big role in my life, and I was definitely the one the party never ended with me. Everyone else knew when it was time to call it a day, and I never quite had that off switch. I always wanted the party to keep going. I loved my nights out. But at that point, I didn't consider my drinking in any way problematic. I didn't drink that much on my own at home. It was something I did to socialise. I mean, the difference is in London, when you're single, you're probably socialising 5 nights a week, but that was kind of what it was. What changed for me was in 2010, I had my son in January 2010, and then in October 2010, we moved to Perth. My husband's from New Zealand. We decided to move over this side of the world to bring up our kids in the outdoors and the beach. And I completely underestimated A, what motherhood, and B, what leaving my family and friends would be like. We got to Perth and I fell pregnant again within 2 or 3 weeks of being here. And then all of a sudden I had 2 under 2. I wasn't working. I had no friends. I had no family. I had a husband that was going out, setting up a business, working all the hours. And I had gone from, I had a very successful career in London. I was a director of a recruitment firm by this point. Weekends were spent in Saint-Tropez, in New York, like living this high flying life. And all of a sudden I was at home in Perth without knowing anybody, and with 2 very, very young children who it was incredibly demanding. And it was hard, like not to have your best friends down the road, not to have your mum around the corner, not to have anyone in your social network that has known you for a really long time to be there to support you. And that's when my drinking changed. And looking back now, I can see that that's when alcohol for me became my reward at the end of the day. It became, because before, drinking had been something I did when I was going out all the time, but I was never going out because I had no friends and I had 2 young kids. And so then how did I get my alcohol fix? Well, I did it by justifying it at 5 o'clock every day by going, you've got through another day, you've survived it, just a glass of wine to take the edge off as that little reward. And as we know, like none of us need to look twice to see the encouragement from social media, from marketing campaigns. It's everywhere that, you know, mums deserve wine, it's self-care after a busy day, etc. And even then, like looking back now, I wouldn't say that I had any warning bells. Like that was just what I did. I wasn't drinking at a level where I was blacking out. I was drinking most days, but it wasn't at a significant level. But then I think that started to creep up, because that's the thing with alcohol. Number one, it's really addictive. And number two, you become immune to it. So then you need more and more to get that buzz. So what had started off as being 1 or 2 glasses a night then became 2 or 3, and then it became the bottle. Or as long as there was that tiny bit left at the end of the bottle, then it was okay, because I could say to myself, I didn't have a full bottle. I poured out the last little bit. And probably even looking back at that point, I was starting to make rules around my drinking. And I always say to the ladies that I work with now, if we've even got to the point where we're making rules, then there's probably some kind of problem going on, because people that don't have a problem don't make rules. Alcohol is just there when they have a drink, and it's not there other times. Whereas I had constant rules. I constantly made rules and I constantly broke them. So, I don't drink Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Oh, but it's Tuesday and it's been a really hard day. I'll just have 1 drink today, but I won't have Thursday's drink. So I won't have a drink on Thursday, but I'll just have a drink today. And then of course it'd be Wednesday and Thursday, and it would continue. And by then the kids were at school. And again, like, I think the culture of even just meeting other mums in the playground, etc., is very much, oh, come over for a wine on a Friday afternoon. Like I was the leader of that. I was always inviting people, come for a wine, let's go to the river for a barbecue and wine. And everything revolved around alcohol. And that kind of just kept on going until it got to the point, probably 2017, where I had a couple of incidents where the hangovers had been really bad. I'd started to get really bad anxiety. So the next day after drinking, I was like a shell of myself. I was paranoid. I was really going over in my head, what did I say last night? What did I do last night? And I went to my GP at one point, and I was a mess. And I was like, I don't know what's happening to me. I feel so down. I feel so sad. And at no point did she say to me, how much are you drinking? And yet happily wrote me a prescription for anti-anxiety tablets. But without there being any conversation about what my drinking levels were like. What I now know is alcohol causes anxiety. Like there is an actual, what happens in our brain when we drink means that we actually do feel more anxious as we go through alcohol withdrawal. But again, I didn't know that, because to me, alcohol was self-care.
Well,
And
and
that,
alcohol is marketed as an anti-anxiety medication, basically.
yeah,
And people don't realize that you're relieving the anxiety that you're creating with the alcohol by drinking the alcohol.
and
Yeah.
that's it. You end up in that vicious circle
Yeah.
of you feel so bad, so you have a drink. The drink in the immediate instant relieves the anxiety. But I mean, I love this quote. It says, alcohol postpones anxiety and then multiplies it. And it's so true.
It's so true. Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
true.
And so 2017, I had gone out for a girlfriend's birthday. We'd done a big free flowing, all you can drink champagne buffet, you know, $50 for 3 hours of free flowing wine and champagne. We started at 12 and I got home at 2 the next morning. So that was 14 hours
And you
of,
know, that's sorry to interrupt you. That's
yeah,
impressive. I went, wow, and as if it's like an achievement. Like that's
I know.
impressive to people. They go, wow, you're amazing. And it's
Yeah.
like that's crazy actually.
Yeah.
That's crazy
to
thinking.
be able to say that, oh yeah, that was that's what I'm proud of in my life. I can drink for 14 hours straight without being sick. Like
Mm.
the next day I had to take my son to cricket at early morning, and I couldn't drive him because I was still over the limit. I knew that I would still be over the limit, and the shame I felt in that moment, the guilt, the remorse, on top of the hangover, on top of everything else. I remember I ran myself a bath and I got in the bath and it was like 8:30, 9 in the morning, and I just cried and cried and cried. And I was like, I can't carry on doing this. It's just not sustainable. And something in me said, just take a break from booze for a bit. Just do a 21-day reset. You know, I thought ignorantly, I'll take 21 days off and then everything will be fine. There won't be a problem after that.
Yeah.
So I took 21 days off and I felt so good that I went on to do 100 days. Because this was my first time of ever being me without booze. This was the first time of me as an adult, apart from when I was pregnant, and I was a hormonal mess when I was pregnant, so I wouldn't even class that as me being me.
No, I say that too. When I took a year off at first just for a challenge, and I say to people, I did it because I've never done that for myself. I've got 3 kids and I did it when I was pregnant and I was breastfeeding as well. So I was, not drinking for a long period of time, but it was never actually for me. It was almost like, oh, I can't drink, breastfeeding, whereas I was like, I'm actually doing this as a gift for myself. What a gift.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I did the 21 days and kept on going because I was like, oh my goodness, goodbye anxiety. There was no anxiety. Hello, positive mood. Hello, lots of energy. Hello, lots of motivation, mental clarity, weight loss. My skin looked amazing. Like all of these benefits, like my sleep was so good. And I was like, wow, I didn't expect to have gotten this much from it. But it got to the 100 days and the peer pressure was quite strong because when you are known as Sarah the party girl, that's kind of your identity and that's what everybody expects of you. So there would be lots of comments around, oh, are you still not drinking? Should we catch up again when you're drinking again? And that can be really hard because it's hard enough to not drink in an alcohol-centric society. And then on top of that, to have peer pressure from friends. But that's not to say that I'm being negative towards them because they didn't know how to handle me either because they were used to me being the one driving the boozy nights, the boozy afternoons, everything like that. So at the end of the 100 days, I was like, well, that's it. I'm fine now. I can't be an alcoholic because I've done 100 days off. And so there isn't a problem. So now I've reset. Now everything's just normal. And now I'll be a normal drinker. So I went back to drinking. And within 2 weeks, I was back to drinking at the levels that I had been.
Did you start off slow? Did you sort of think I'm going to try and only do Tuesday, Thursday, Friday or whatever? And then it just very quickly went back to,
Yeah, the first night I can clear as day remember it. I went out for dinner with my best friend and her husband and my husband, and I had 1 glass of wine, and I had that entire glass of wine throughout the entire dinner. And I was like, oh, look at me, I've changed. I'm amazing now. I'm one of those 1 glass of wine a night women. I'm just all fixed. Everything's fine. The next time I went out, oh, I can have 2. 2's okay. The next time after 2, I mean, that was it. The floodgates were open. And it was so interesting how quickly it really did get straight back to the level it had been before. And if not, then it got worse, because it was almost like I was making up for lost time. And so that carried on. I then had 2 years of being stuck in that area of taking breaks, because I knew how good I felt when I didn't drink, but never being able to commit to saying, well, I can't never drink again, because that would just be weird, because I'm Sarah the party girl, and what would I do if I didn't drink forever? Like I was trying so hard to moderate. I was trying so hard to be someone that in my mind was a normal drinker, someone that could have 1 or 2 drinks and then not think about it for a couple of weeks. And then, you know, but the problem was that was never going to be that type of drinker. So even if I managed to only have 1 or 2 glasses of wine over a couple of weeks, the mental headspace that was taking up around the rules, making the rules. No, you can't drink tonight. Oh, but maybe I could drink tonight. If I didn't drink on Saturday, then I could maybe have that one. There was all of this negotiation, and it's exhausting.
I did that. I was sort of sober curious for quite a while before I stopped drinking. And I have to admit that a part of not stopping for as long as I did was because I was kind of afraid about what it would do to my friendships and my social life, because we were living in New Zealand actually at the time, which is not our home. And so the friends that we had were new friends, and it all revolved around drinking. It was the kids played rugby, and so there was a lot of drinking. And so I kind of persevered. I'm not saying I would have stopped immediately. I enjoyed it as well. Like, it was me as much as it was the social pressure. But that was... Yeah, it was, and there was a lot of rules around it as well with my husband. My husband stopped with me for the year as well, and where we were like, well, you drink tonight and I'll drive, and then no. And I just explained to people that there was this mental exhaustion, like you said, you know, just this thinking, constant thinking. Oh, today's the day, tomorrow's the day. It's just crazy. It's your mind goes nuts, doesn't it?
Yeah. Or if I decided I was going to drink on a certain date at a certain event, I would literally be counting down the days to, and then it just got to that point where it's like, but when I do drink, I wasn't getting the same buzz from it anymore. The hangovers were just horrendous. You know, I was in my early 40s at this point. Every time I drank, I would wake up at 3 a.m. Pretty much every time. Because I now understand the physiological reasons for that. And so then I got to the point where, because I knew I would wake up at 3 a.m., I would take a sleeping tablet. So then you can imagine how you feel when you wake up in the morning after you've had half a bottle or a bottle of wine plus a sleeping tablet, and then you get up and you've got to do the school run, and I was running a business and all the rest of it. I just felt like crap so much of the time. And the thing is that I'd never forgotten how I felt that 100 days. I never forgot that different version of me that was a different mom. Like, I just felt I was so present with my kids, because the difference was in my drink when I was drinking, like, you know, come to the evening routine, I couldn't be bothered reading them stories. I was just rushing through the stories as quickly as possible so I could get back to my wine. Or I was, you know, sneaking out the bag to go and have a cigarette behind the washing line with my glass of wine and pretending that I wasn't there, and putting the kids in front of the iPad. And there's a time and a place for doing that, but it was becoming more and more, and that wasn't the mum that I wanted to be. And so I had this constant conflict inside me. And then it felt like it just became clear as day that I knew what the answer was. And so I set the date, which was the 28th of April, 2019.
So you've got an anniversary coming up soon.
I have got an anniversary next month, yeah.
Cool.
And it was the day after a friend's 40th. Because I thought, right, I'm going to go to this 40th, I'm going to have my last big blowout, and that will be it. And it's so funny, because I thought, oh, I'm going to go and just have the best night. I'm just going to, you know, dance and drink and do all the things. And I didn't do any of that. I went home early, because which was really interesting. Obviously, my mind was made up, and I was drinking the wine, and I wasn't enjoying it, because I think I just knew that I was so done. I was done with feeling like crap all the time. And so that was it. That was my last drink.
Wow, that's amazing. It's so similar to my story as well. We're similar age, so even the uni stories, I've got all those as well. But yeah, it's so interesting. And I think you're right. I think you do need to get to a point yourself where you sort of go, this is it for me. I think, you know, having had a break so you can compare it to something is probably really beneficial. Yeah. And I was the same after we did our year. I said to my husband, I didn't end up having a glass of wine for 18 months because I just didn't want to ruin the feeling. And then somebody bought a really nice bottle and they said, oh, just have some. So I had a couple of sips. It tasted terrible because my taste buds had changed. And I was
Yeah.
like, you know what? I'm okay. I'm fine without this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you talk about a lot about grey area drinking, and you describe yourself as a grey area drinker. And I was just wondering whether you could explain that a little bit more, because I think that's probably what I was too. I didn't have a rock bottom. I didn't have, like you said, no lost job or lost marriage or anything like that. It was just affecting my life in a negative way. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the grey area drinking.
Yeah. So it's a relatively new term, especially here in Australia. It's much more commonly talked about in the UK and the States. But grey area drinking, so if you think about someone's drinking as being on a scale of 1 to 10. So 1, you've got someone who very rarely drinks, maybe has a glass of champagne at a wedding twice a year, and other than that, alcohol just doesn't even feature in their life. 10 is someone who is end stage physical dependency on alcohol, and they would need to go into a medical facility and be monitored to stop drinking, because otherwise the withdrawal could be so bad that they could die. So those are 2 very extreme ends of the scale, and they're probably the most unusual. So grey area drinking is where I would say between a 5 and an 8 on that scale. So I would say it's when we get to that point where, you know, how do we know if we're a grey area drinker? So we're making rules about our drinking. We are making rules and we're breaking them. So I'm just going to have 2 tonight. And then before you know it, you've left the car, you've got an Uber home, you don't remember how you got home, you know, all of those type things. You start to notice that alcohol is taking up lots of headspace. You're thinking about it a lot more. You're worrying about your drinking. Maybe you've even Googled something, you know, am I an alcoholic? Which I think I had Googled, you know, a few times myself. And we start to kind of notice that the role that alcohol's playing in our life, it's not the same as it used to be. You know, it's not just this fun thing that we used to do that was going out. We find that we're using it as a crutch. We find that it's the first thing we think of when we've had an argument with our husband, when we've had a shit day at work, when we're feeling stressed, overwhelmed, tired. We can't imagine getting through that evening without a glass of wine. So when we've developed it into, I mean, some people will call it a habit, some people will call it dependency. I mean, I would call that a level of addiction. And I think that the interesting conversation now is that addiction is not black or white. You're not an alcoholic or not an alcoholic. You can still have an addiction to alcohol and not be an alcoholic. Doesn't mean that you're drinking every single day to have an addiction, but it's when you're craving something that alters your state of mind and you find it hard to give up. And what's been really interesting for me has been, so I set up my business last year as a grey area drinking coach, and I work with women all over the world. And what's been really interesting is the number of women who during COVID and lockdown have noticed how much their drinking has escalated. And then they've gone, oh, it's fine, I'm okay with this. And then once we're out of lockdown, I will sort it out. And then they've come out of lockdown and found that they haven't been able to. And the reason for that is alcohol is incredibly addictive. And once those neural pathways have changed and we have developed a level of dependency, it's incredibly difficult to rein that back in.
And there's the physical addiction aspect of it and the psychological dependence. I have to call it dependence because I'm a scientist, because addiction is purely psychological, but like the dependence part of it. And that is like what we were talking about, the psychological, where you're like going, but I might miss out, or what will my friends think? And so there's sort of this other part of the mind part, I suppose, that is got the dependence rather than the physical dependence, which is the change in the neural pathways. And it's interesting you said that, because people, like, you wouldn't expect to go out and, you know, I don't know, have 3 weeks worth of sugar, let's say, every single day. You have a huge amount of sugar and then suddenly go, now I'm not eating sugar anymore. Your body has become accustomed to it, and your brain has changed in a certain way to accommodate for that. It changes to try and keep the equilibrium. And so when you're bringing a poison in, whether it's I know you know all this, but an alcohol or a sugar or heroin, or it doesn't matter what it is, the body has to try and even that out somehow. And that is why when we stop, we can then suddenly not just stop and go back to how it used to be. And I think that's probably really interesting for a lot of people, especially lockdown is a great example. I know that, you know, alcohol consumption has gone through the roof, I think in most countries. There's probably a lot of people struggling with trying to curb it now that we're all kind of going back to some sort of normal.
Absolutely. And, you know, and going back to what you said just then, you know, when those I believe that there's a point where when we cross that line from being a take it or leave it drinker to having having a relationship with alcohol is what I call it. If we even have a relationship with alcohol, we're probably in that grey area.
Yeah.
And I think that when we have got to that point, I think moderation is incredibly difficult for a couple of reasons. Once we've had that first drink, we don't then go back to the alcohol wears off. We don't go back to where we were when we started. We actually feel so much worse. So then you're craving another drink just to get yourself back to where you were before you even had that first drink. And so, and I think it's really interesting to note that it takes 72 hours for alcohol to leave the system. So even if we're drinking just 2 or 3 times a week, we are not living our life at our peak potential because our body is still going to be going through withdrawal. Like I used to think if I didn't drink Monday and Tuesday, then that was kind of okay. And sometimes I didn't drink on a Wednesday and I was like, well, I am rocking it this week. I've done like, I had Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday off the booze, like look at me go type thing. But Monday and Tuesday, you're still getting over the effects from the weekend. So maybe if on a Wednesday and Thursday, I might be just about living my life at my best in terms of my motivation, my energy, my performance at the gym, how I'm showing up at work, how I'm showing up in my relationships. And then come Thursday, I'm drinking again. So Friday, feeling like crap. And there we are just in that cycle. And that's why I say to all the ladies that I work with, see it as an experiment. I'm not there to say to you, you must never drink again, but I'm there to say, see it as an experiment and get to know who you are without booze, because you might be really surprised.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's almost like self-sabotage, isn't it? Getting to that Thursday and just undoing all the goodness. And you're right. And I think that it's a wonderful invitation to get to know yourself by not drinking, because we mask so much with it, whether it's motherhood or stress in your relationship or work or whatever it is, we mask it and we use it as something to, I guess, make things better. And but the stuff doesn't go away. And like you said about the anxiety, you might push the work problems away for another day, but then they just get amplified. So it doesn't go away.
And that's the thing about when we do remove it, the feeling for me that I had of being able to kind of face what I'd been avoiding. And that can be hard because it was the first time in my life that I'd ever had to really sit with my emotions, because I'd numbed the entire time. There's a brilliant book called Glorious Rock Bottom by Bryony Gordon. And she talks about the fact that when we stop drinking, we resort to having the emotional age that we were when we started drinking. Because we have stopped evolving emotionally, because all we've done is then avoid and distract with alcohol, where you don't deal with your emotions, you don't process them, you don't sit with them. And as human beings, we are so uncomfortable experiencing the emotions that bring about discomfort, that we immediately go, oh my goodness, I can't feel like this, I must distract. Whether that be alcohol, whether it be sugar, whether it be some other coping mechanism to allow us to not sit with. And that's been the biggest part of my growth, in terms of actually being able to recognize an emotion that I'm feeling and not have to avoid it and go, oh, okay, I'm feeling hurt right now because such and such has happened, or I'm feeling lonely, or I'm feeling angry, and I can do that now, which feels like I feel like I've grown up more in the last 3 years than I did in the last 40. So that's been such a big gift as well.
Yeah, that's amazing. And do you think I was just going to say, like, I don't want people to think that it's like a sudden burden of emotional work that they need to go through. Do you find that you've become more resilient in dealing with what comes to you on a day-to-day basis as well? So it's not like you've suddenly gone from, to be this vulnerable kind of child to when 15-year-old when you started drinking. I found that my resilience has been greater. So when I have, not been drinking, that whatever onslaught comes, I sort of can face it better. I feel stronger. Did you find that too?
Absolutely stronger. But I also have, the thing that I have noticed the most is that I am so much calmer. And so the way that I deal with the kids, the way that I am with them is so different.
Yeah, I feel like
I feel like I am more resilient the things that bother me just don't bother me at the same level that they did before, and they move past a lot quicker. I don't dwell on things in quite the same way that I did when I was drinking a lot, because you're just distracting and you're avoiding, as opposed to processing and moving past it. But I just find that I've built a toolkit of other ways to manage stress in a healthier way. Like I meditate. Like, if you'd have told me 3 years ago that I'd be someone who meditated, I'd have laughed in your face, lit up a cigarette, poured a wine, and kind of turned my back on you. Whereas now,
you spell that again?
Now I am like, meditation is massive for me. Like, I do a lot of yoga. I've become very connected to myself. But don't get me wrong, I still love going out with my girlfriends. I still love getting dressed up. Like, it's such a myth that we never socialize again and we never have fun again. I've even done some sober dancing. Like, I've done all of that stuff, and I love it. It's just that when they all start repeating the same story for the 5th time and spitting in my face, then I'm like, right, my time here is done. I'm going home, and I'll just get in my car and drive home. So best of both worlds.
Yeah. Just going back to your parenting and of your children, how have they said anything to you? Have they sort of said, we like you better when you don't drink, or anything like that? Because I'm really intrigued.
Yeah, absolutely. So my son is 11, and last year for Mother's Day, they all had to write them letters to their mums at school. And oh my goodness, Jennifer, like, he came home with this letter that he'd written me, and he said to me, "Dear mum, I want you to know you are the best mum, because you help all the other mums to be the best versions that they can be. And nobody else's mum does jobs like that. And I am so proud of you." And I just, like, tears were just, you don't notice how much they pick up on it.
That is so beautiful.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
It's interesting. And even like my son, because my husband stopped at the same time that I did, so he's coming up to 3 years as well, and I think, my son notices and just says things like it's because my husband was a big smoker when he drank. He goes, "Isn't it nice that Dad doesn't disappear to the garage anymore after dinner?" And just the little things that they pick up on, because my husband would always go out to the garage for a beer and a ciggy after we finished dinner, whereas now we play a board game, we do all our jobs together. Like, it's just very, very different.
Yeah, same in our house as well. And because my husband stopped as well, and my eldest son in particular, who's also 11, you and I have very similar lives. He said within the first year of when we did it, he said, "I hope you never drink again." It just changed our whole family dynamic. And also, I can relate to what you were saying earlier about, like, quick, go to bed, because Daddy and I have got to go upstairs and shove as much wine down our throats before we have to go to sleep, because we're going to go to work tomorrow. That's all gone. And it's been really wonderful. And he even has said, I'm not sure whether it's because of what he remembers from when we were drinking, or just seeing people that drink, that he never wants to drink. He doesn't, he sees our life and sees what we've achieved, and also money that we've saved. After our first year of not drinking, we saved all our money. We went on a holiday. We went on a big family holiday. It was so much money that we saved. So he sees that. I'm sure the other two do as well, but they're just a bit younger. And that makes me really happy as well, that we can be good role models from time to time, because we mess up elsewhere.
Oh, for sure. And it was so interesting, because I was doing a talk the other day, and I was saying it's so interesting what's modeled to us. So I can clear as day remember being quite young and watching my mum and dad have an argument, and my dad going straight to the drinks cabinet and pouring himself a whiskey. And you don't realize at the time what you take on. But then I reflected on the first time I had an argument with my first boyfriend. What do you think I did? I went straight to the drinks cabinet and poured myself a whiskey. Because, whiskey, like I was 17 or 18 years old, but like, that's what I'd seen. And so it's so interesting. The subliminal messaging that I had in that moment was, when you have an argument with someone, go and drink a whiskey, and that makes you feel better.
Well, it's what we've been taught, and I actually wanted to talk to you about that a little bit as well, about the social influence on women in general, but particularly mothers. I think that when we were first-time mothers, so like 10, 11 years ago, I don't think it was as strong as it is now-ish, where there is this whole almost community around drinking alcohol together, and this... Well, people say it. I was going to say it's like a non-spoken notion, but it's actually, people say it, that alcohol makes motherhood easier. And it should almost be illegal to say that, because it's not true.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's been so many studies done that have actually shown when the alcohol companies made a conscious decision to start targeting women and to start targeting mothers, and when alcohol sales increased to that, to our demographic. So it was a targeted campaign, and we've all just gone, we don't. I didn't need to be told twice that I deserved a wine at the end of the day, and that we are vulnerable in that moment. We are emotional and we are vulnerable. We are doubting ourselves, particularly when you're a first-time mom, and have I done it right, and all of that guilt and that worry that you carry all the time. And alcohol is really, really good at making that all disappear in that moment. But and the problem is it's in that moment, and then it comes back.
And it's almost like it snowballs in that period when you're not paying attention to it. And it's that instant endorphin kick of dopamine and serotonin, where it does make you feel good because you've had a shit day, and so you've have this instant gratification, I guess, where you go, now I feel better for, I don't know, do you know how long it is? 5 minutes, 15 minutes, or what is that little buzz?
15, 20 minutes, and then the alcohol wears off.
Yeah, right. And then suddenly, meanwhile, you're snowballing all the problems just for another day. And I remember when my first mother's group, I think with my second son, I met a woman who I really enjoyed, and our boys became really good friends. And the first time we met, we were somewhere, I don't know if it was a park or at an RSL or something, and everybody was drinking, and I wasn't drinking because I was pregnant with my daughter, I think, already, but I hadn't told anybody. And so when I admitted I was pregnant, or maybe I had her, I can't remember exactly how it went. I just remember her saying to me at one point, "Oh my God, I thought we couldn't be friends because you don't drink."
Yeah.
And I was like, at the time I was like really quickly trying to tell him, no, I do, because I didn't want to be left out. I didn't want to be different. I didn't want to be weird,
Yeah. It's incredible. But and it's interesting for me to reflect back on what I was like when I was drinking, because I would have been that person saying, "Oh, we can't be friends if you don't drink." Like, I was so into my wine and needing to be with other people, that like I surrounded myself with other people that drank at the same level that I did, because when we do that, we don't have to question ourselves, and we don't have to, like, that's what grey area drinkers do, is they generally surround themselves with other grey area drinkers so that it's not a problem, because if we're all doing it, it can't be that bad.
And then they can also say, well, at least I'm not as bad as Sarah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Or Jen or whatever, so that there's definitely that kind of level of what is it? Just level there.
Yeah.
So if there's a mother listening at the moment who identifies as a grey area drinker and feels that alcohol is impacting her mothering of her children and of herself, what tip would you give her?
Yeah. So that was why last year I retrained to become a grey area drinking coach. And that was because in Australia, up until now, the conversation has been, you're an alcoholic or you're not.
Yeah.
If you're an alcoholic, you go to AA and you stand up in a room and say, "Hi, I'm Sarah, I'm an alcoholic." And I never did that because I never identified as being an alcoholic. But I had a dysfunctional relationship with alcohol, but there was nowhere for me to go. So I joined a group in the UK that was all women like me, all mums, all of a similar age, who were taking a break from alcohol together, because there was no such thing in Australia at this time. This was going back to 2017. I then created a group myself 18 months ago to be able to give a safe place for women to come and to be able to share openly and honestly what their relationship with alcohol is like, and to get support and encouragement from others. And I think that is one of the key points of all of this, is knowing that you're not alone. Don't feel shame. Like, I used to feel so much shame. Why is it me? Why do I always drink too much? Why am I always the one that makes a dick of themselves, falling over and can't remember getting home? Like, why can't I stop at 1 or 2 when everyone else seems to be able to? And I was stuck in this cycle of just shame and self-loathing for such a long time. And it's interesting, last year I did an interview with Mamma Mia, and they put my story up on their website, which was me sharing my drinking story. 7,500 women have responded to that story so far and reached out to me. And every single one of them said the same thing: "You just told my story."
Amazing.
And so that just shows you are not alone. Like, there are so many people who are in that mummy wine culture of, we deserve wine, wine is self-care, wine is what we need at the end of the day. And seemingly on the surface, everybody's doing that and everyone's fine with it. But I know that inside there are so many people who are struggling. So many.
I think partly that is also to do with the fact that this is more the work that I do, but we neglect mothers so much. Their mothers are undervalued and under-resourced, and so we are not giving mothers any tools of how to deal with the stress of matrescence and motherhood without alcohol. And so it's like a quick fix.
Absolutely.
So it's a much bigger problem than I think we even realize.
Yeah, there's a brilliant book, if any of your listeners want to get it. It's called The Wine O'Clock Myth.
Oh, yes, I've seen it.
By Lotta Dan. She's a New Zealander. And she's written a brilliant book about just dispelling all the myths about wine o'clock and how we all deserve wine at 5 o'clock and all the rest of it. It's a really interesting read. But for any of your listeners, I would say join a group, my group, the Women's Wellbeing Collective. We've got close to 10,000 women now from all over the world. Do some of the reading. Like, if you go onto my website, there's a free guide that you can download, and it's got all my top resources for if you are just sober curious, if you're listening to this and you're kind of thinking, wow, what Sarah and Jen are talking about, this resonates with me, and maybe I am interested in taking a break and seeing what that's like. But I don't know where to start because all my friends drink and I can't imagine how I would deal with that. I've got a free guide on my website with the books that absolutely helped me in the early days. There are so many books, so many podcasts.
I'll put your website in the show notes and also in below in the podcast so people can find you.
Awesome. And start to be curious. Start to reflect on when you notice yourself wanting to have a glass of wine. Notice what's triggered it. Is it habit because it's 5 o'clock, or is it when you're tired, or is it when you're feeling really stressed? Another one is boredom. Like, I think for me that I really struggled with going from having a very demanding senior role to being at home with 2 kids under 2 all day, singing Row Row Your Boat and changing nappies and breastfeeding and then bottle feeding and all the rest of it. And it was a really hard transition for me. It was really, really hard.
Yeah, and it is. And motherhood is a really, really hard transition. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to support women in that. And I think, obviously your resource is just amazing what you've got on your website. And I really encourage all women who drink and would like to not drink so much to have a look through your website, because it really, it's important. And I'm so grateful that you are doing this. I really am. I wish you had been around when I gave up alcohol. I think that it would have been a lot easier if I had the community of just women and mothers in particular. Mothers who encourage each other to keep going without having a wine, rather than your friends, you say, oh, it's been just the worst day, go home, have a wine.
Absolutely. And I would say the majority of the women that come to me are 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
That age bracket where perhaps in our 30s the wine worked, and then we start noticing in our 40s it ain't working anymore. And that's also because, we're drinking more, hormones are changing, all the rest of it. Kids are getting older, and then perhaps we're kind of going, well, what? Like, if you'd asked me what are my hobbies, I would have said going to the gym and getting drunk. That was kind of what I did, right? Whereas now my life is so varied and so interesting and so fulfilling, and I've met so many new people that I wouldn't even want to go back to drinking.
That's amazing. That's so wonderful to hear. Thanks, Sarah. It's been such an informative chat, and I think such an important chat, even though it can be a tricky topic to broach with people. I think it's really important to talk about, and I love the way that you deliver it as well, without any judgment and just with kind-heartedness and support, because that's what we need.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you for tuning in to the Tough Mothers podcast. I'm Jennifer Hacker-Pearson. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please consider leaving a 5-star rating and a review on your favorite podcast app. Please also subscribe to my YouTube channel, Dr. Jen Tough Mothers, because this way I can keep bringing you free information and knowledge about motherhood that will help you be the happiest mother you know. See you next time.